News election headquarters in New York. It is 7 o'clock on the East Coast, and polls have just closed in half a dozen states. Welcome to Fox News Democracy 24 coverage. I'm Shannon Breen.
Welcome to you. Good to be with you tonight. I'm John Roberts. The magic number to get to tonight for president, 270 electoral votes. But races for the Senate, the House, and other seats are also on the ballots. Got the latest for you.
Okay, the most closely watched state at this hour is Georgia, one of 7 battleground states that could decide the presidency. It is too early to call. It's also too early to call Virginia, though Harris has a lead in our Fox News voter analysis.
Fox News can project that former President Trump will win Indiana. No surprise there. Trump will also carry nearby Kentucky for a third time.
It is still too early to call South Carolina, but Trump has the lead in our Fox News voter analysis there as well. Meanwhile, Vice President Harris will sail to victory in liberal Vermont. And
here is a current look at the race to 270. You can see the battleground states. They are there in yellow, all 7 of them.
Yeah, and turning to the Senate, that's going to be a big story tonight. Democrats have almost no room for error. The Fox News decision desk can project that Indiana Republican Congressman Jim Banks will win his first Senate race.
In Virginia, it's too early to call in the race between incumbent Democrat Senator Tim Kaine and his Republican challenger Hung Kao. Longtime independent Senator Bernie Sanders will win a 4th term in Vermont. He caucuses, of course, with the Democrats.
And in the Indiana governor's race, Republican Mike Braun, he's a senator, has a lead now against Democrat Jennifer McCormick. Not enough data yet there to make a call.
And in Vermont, Republican Phil Scott will win a 5th term.
So you are looking live at a polling station in Centennial, Colorado. We're going to take you around the country tonight. Check out things as they unfold. Residents there are making their final dash to vote. One of the many states tonight where millions of Americans, tens of millions, are still casting their ballots. Joe Biden scored a decisive victory in Colorado back in 2020. Polls are still open there until 10 p.m. Eastern time.
All right, let's turn now to our reporters at both campaign headquarters.
That's right. Rich Edson with the Harris camp in Washington, D.C., and Alexis McAdams with the Trump team in Florida. Alexis, we begin with you at Trump headquarters.
Hi, Shannon and John. If you can believe it, it is finally election night in America, okay? Months and months of campaigning went into this on both sides. We've been traveling with the former president across the country as he hit those battleground states and those swing states, doing everything he could in the last couple of days to make his final push to voters. Okay, one of the questions that Trump continued to ask at his rallies, no matter what state we were in listening, was, are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? And tonight, America could answer that question. We are inside of the Palm Beach Convention Center in West Palm Beach, Florida, not too far from where the former president is right now, with a small group of friends and family watching those election results roll in. So we're waiting to get reaction there in real time. You can see there on your screen, that is the stage that is set for the former president if he does show up here at the convention center, and also set for a wide range and a big list of special speakers. The mood in here, to give you kind of a pulse on what's happening, is it's pretty loud. There's a lot of media, but the people who have access to tonight's event are kind of slowly trickling in. That's because there's really been a lot of security preps in place here in Florida to make sure everybody was checked. So to kind of let people in has been moving slowly. But the president and his campaign team say they are confident in their ground game. They think that the Republicans are going to show up. Especially excited, John and Shannon, to see what those numbers were in the rural counties. But no matter where you are, we did see lines for months. I mean, we were with them when he was in Butler, Pennsylvania that day when he was shot on stage, an attempted assassination there. He got back up and he said he was going to fight for this country. We'll see tonight what Americans want and if they want him back in the White House. We'll send it back to you.
All right, Alexis McAdams. We'll keep checking in with you throughout the night. Trump headquarters there. Thank you.
All right, from the Trump headquarters now to the headquarters of the Harris team, and that's where we find our Rich Edson. Rich?
Hi, good evening, John and Shannon. Well, Vice President Kamala Harris is still at the Naval Observatory. That is the official residence of the Vice President of the United States. We expect her here at Howard University, her alma mater, a little bit later this evening. It is an HBCU right in the middle of the nation's capital. She spent a little bit earlier today at Democratic National Headquarters, where she thanks supporters for spending a little time making phone calls for her.
This truly represents the best of who we are. Just reaching out to folks, letting them know that we're all in it together, reminding them of the power of their vote, through their voice. This is just the best. And I just thank you all so very much.
Harris also called into a few radio shows in the swing states like North Carolina. The campaign says it's hitting its benchmarks in states like Pennsylvania, getting their voters to the polls. Officials maintain they've been turning out Democrats who are less than reliable voters and that they've been successful in convincing independent voters in the last week. Now, they've also highlighted that ground game staff advantage they have in many of the swing states. Harris's running mate, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, campaigned at a diner in Pennsylvania. It's Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. That's the blue wall. That's where Harris spent much of her closing argument. She held a rally in Philadelphia last night after speaking earlier in Pittsburgh and then the day before across Michigan. She chose not to mention former President Trump over her final few speeches, so as officials say, she could end positively. Before then, Harris had been very much focused on the former president, but that changed a little bit, trying to be a little more positive in the last few days. She's also been very focused on abortion and a bit more towards the end on the economy, as polling towards the end of the race had shown that the race that the former president, the lead that the former president had, Harris had been making a lot of inroads there. So that's the closing pitch. Gave it last night. Now we're just waiting for her here at our alma mater in D.C. John Shannon, back to you.
All right, folks on the Harris side, hoping that they are going to have a good night tonight. Rich Edson reporting from their headquarters. Let's bring in our panel now, and here to break down the results that just came in and the ones that have yet to come in. Outkick columnist Mary Catherine Ham, former State Department spokeswoman Marie Harf, Fox News senior political analyst Juan Williams, and townhall.com political editor Guy Benson.
All right, so it's just the beginning, just the trickling. Everybody pace themselves. It's going to be a long night. Guy, I'll start with you. No surprises in Indiana, but now we wait on Georgia. That could be the first big puzzle piece for either of these campaigns tonight.
Totally. The calls so far, unsurprising in every way. We'll be looking at some of the margins, maybe in some of the counties in these early states. But yeah, I mean, North Carolina, Georgia, the big early ones, with Georgia already closed. And just looking at our Fox News voter analysis, economy #1 at 39% in terms of the top issue, immigration 20%. Those are the Republicans and Donald Trump's top two issues. The fact that it's a tight race, I think, is still fascinating because Democrats seem to be doing well on the bevy of smaller issues, right, in this national tapestry. So how this all goes, a point or two in either direction, could come down to ground game, could come down to how people are feeling literally as they go to polls today, and whether Republicans turn out the people that they needed to on Election Day to overcome some of the advantages Democrats had built, smaller than last time in the early vote.
So far, the results that we've seen come in, Indiana, Kentucky, Vermont, those are no-brainers. They were going to go either red or blue. We'll start to get some results in Georgia very soon as the polls closed there a short time ago. As Guy was mentioning, Cobb County, Gwinnett, Fulton, DeKalb, Clayton, those are the counties that we'll be really watching to see what the margins are. But speaking of the Fox News voter analysis, Marie, 70% of people said that they think this country is on the wrong track. And if you are the incumbent vice president, how do you make the case that you can change that?
Well, first, Donald Trump also has been an incumbent. This is a strange year where you have two people who have been in the White House. It's been interesting in polling that we've seen over the past weeks and even today that on the economy, Trump has a lead, but it's not a huge lead. You know, in some polls, close to 4 out of 10 people in the country think that she could do as good a job as Donald Trump. And so we know people vote on the economy. We talk a lot about inflation. So I don't think, unlike immigration, where he has a huge lead compared to Harris, I think on the economy, she's made up a lot of ground.
What do you think is responsible for making up that ground?
Look, I think she has talked a lot about her plans for the middle class. On taxes, they basically poll even in many polls. She's talked about housing credits. She's talked about child care tax credits. She's talked about how economists think Donald Trump's plans, tariffs, which are taxes, will take money from average Americans. And so I think that's actually been pretty effective. Democrats tonight will tell you they feel very good about their ground game. Guy is right. This is a close election. Democrats knocked on 2,000 doors a minute in Pennsylvania last weekend. They made hundreds of thousands of calls and door knocks just today. That is a ground game that the Republicans, they outsourced a lot of this to Elon Musk. They have not been able to match. And so if we're coming down to ground game here, which in many states this will, Democrats are feeling confident tonight.
Well, and you have to wonder, we know that the vice president was in 5 different stops in Pennsylvania for her last full day of campaigning. Juan, does that suggest to you that they see there is an issue there? I mean, it sounds like the ground game has got it covered, but they didn't branch out anywhere else. There was no Michigan, Wisconsin. It was all Pennsylvania for those last few stops.
No, I think it suggests there's some degree of confidence with regard to Wisconsin and Michigan. But Pennsylvania, as somebody said to me, that's the dogfight. That's the game.
Absolutely is.
And so that's why I think you saw Oprah Winfrey on stage. That's why the Get Out the Vote effort there is tremendous, the high rate of people knocking on doors for the Harris campaign. But I wanted to respond to something John was talking about, which is the high percentage of people who say the country's headed in the wrong direction. In the Fox News voter analysis, it was also true that they said, and this struck me, half of all the voters that were surveyed said the future of democracy is on the ballot. Well, wait a minute. So they're also concerned about where we're going with this country, and a lot of them are concerned that we may be headed in the wrong direction in those terms, John. And I think when you look at it, you get a high percentage of those people saying they would vote for the current vice president, even though she's the incumbent, to your point.
I remember there was one poll that I saw last week that asked the question about who's best to defend democracy. Donald Trump actually came out on top of that poll, which I think was the only poll that showed him leading on that front. So in addition to 70% of people, Mary Catherine Ham, saying that the country is on the wrong track, 25% say when it comes to change, they want complete upheaval. I mean, that would really seem to speak to Donald Trump.
Yeah,
because he's good at upheaval. It's kind of a stock and trade for him.
Yeah.
He would seem to be the natural fit for that constituency. And I think the question we're going to get answered tonight is how much of a change election this is. As Maureen notes, they're both sort of incumbents, but also both sort of selling themselves as change agents. I think Trump is the more natural fit for these people. An interesting preview out of Indiana about what these suburbs might look like and whether Harris is doing the job she wants to do, wooing these sort of soft GOP, educated, affluent voters. Hamilton County went for Trump by 56% in 2016, 52 in 2020, and now it's looking with 70% in like pretty even for these two.
Interesting.
It might just preview what we see in suburbs in other states.
Well, what you said on the change issue, 25% said they wanted complete and total upheaval. On top of that, another 6 in 10 said they wanted significant change. So that would suggest to me then we're now over 80% guy who say they want some kind of change. The vice president is part of the current administration, but she's done a really good job at trying to separate herself from being titled the incumbent. That's how they've tried to label the former president, though it hasn't been him for 4 years.
Right. I think what the Trump campaign leaned into smartly, in my view, was the comments that the vice president made on The View, where she said she couldn't think of a single thing that she would have done differently for the last 4 years. It is tough to really separate yourself from your own administration, first of all, especially if you look at your co-president or the man who's in the Oval Office right now and say, yeah, that was all perfect for the last 4 years. So we saw that a lot in ads. I think the response, the rejoinder from the Democrats has been, well, let's not think too hard about that. Do we want the return of the chaos of Donald Trump and the threat to democracy that he poses? They have been pounding away at that argument, and we'll see if it penetrates again, because I think it had more penetration than Republicans thought it would in the midterm elections. Does it still have that same salience a full 2 years later, especially with so many people deeply unhappy with the state of the country under Joe Biden and Kamala Harris?
I think that's a key point, because what we saw in the analysis is half of the voters said they were concerned about authoritarian rule by Donald Trump, far in excess of what they saw as an authoritarian threat coming from Harris. So the whole notion of the future of democracy, the authoritarian threat, is apparently an issue in this race.
But when it comes to this idea of Harris as a change agent, I mean, Democratic voters have got to take, or people who vote for her at large, have to take a little bit of a leap of faith, because to some degree, it's a Nancy Pelosi. We have to pass the bill to find out what's inside it. She's been so vague for the most part on policy that how do you really know what she'll change and how she'll change it?
I think we cannot underestimate the fact that she is a new generation of leader. And we knew before Joe Biden dropped out of the race, a lot of the American people, a majority of the American people, didn't want to vote for Donald Trump or Joe Biden. They wanted someone new. They wanted someone fresh. They wanted a new generation. So setting aside any policy, she represents that. I also think that she, at the beginning of the campaign, you could have said she didn't have as many policy proposals. She spent the last month putting out a ton of economic proposals, saying she would sign the Republican-led immigration bill that sent more resources to the border, talking about all kinds of policies related to foreign policy and other issues. So I think voters towards the end of the campaign were hearing her talk about that versus Donald Trump talking about taking care of women, whether or not we want him to, talking about all manner of things that were not on message. You hear Republican strategists say, if he just stuck to the message, he's spent minutes and minutes at every one of his rallies calling Democrats demonic, right, saying we're scum. And I think he didn't stay on message in the last month in the same way that she did from a policy perspective.
Yeah, well, there's been a lot of language thrown around these last couple of weeks in these closing arguments, fascist and all kinds of other things. So it gets a little ugly towards the end, but we're going to watch and see where the dust all settles tonight.
All right, well, it has been a fabulous first 15 minutes. It's kind of like we made it over the Verrazano Narrows Bridge. Now we're headed up toward the Bronx. We're just getting started. A lot more races to come tonight.
Stick with us. We're going to keep you updated on that race to 270. Here's where it stands at this moment.
Something that we're going to be doing all night that you'll see only here on Fox is that we are tracking the issues that are driving voters to the polls in a very, very special way.
Yeah, this gets you really good information from the ground, from the voters. Sandra Smith is here to break down the Fox News voter analysis. Hello, Sandra.
Hi, Shannon. Hey, John. Yeah, you will not see this anywhere else. These are different than exit polls. We interviewed voters by phone, by landline, cell phone, online, leading up to Election Day, and we met them where they are, all over the country, 50 states, over 120,000 voters we were able to connect with. We asked them who they voted for and why, and it will tell the story of this night and this election. And I want to dive in right now, since the polls did close in Georgia, to some key data that we are already seeing there, okay? So I'm going to break it down by some of the key groups that we know we have been watching leading up to Election Day. And of course, this screen up here doesn't like me, and it's not going to get in there. Okay, I can tell you this. This is what's happening. Kamala Harris with black voters. She's getting about 83% of their support in Georgia. Biden was getting about 91% of it, okay? She's running about 8 points behind his levels, okay? Black men voters, she's getting about 73% of their support. She's running about 13 points behind Joe Biden's levels. Okay, it just fired up. This screen is a little different than the screen downstairs. We knew that could happen. John, you know that. All right, here's the timing of the vote. I'm going to break this down for you. First we asked them, when did you vote? We know so many people are early voting, right? So among those early voters, Shannon and John, the vote is about split. If you early voted, it shows you didn't have a preference. It didn't split either way or favor either candidate. Those who voted on Election Day, perhaps there's a story here I'll let you discuss. So if you had it split on early vote and you had it favoring Trump on Election Day, there's a story there. All right, let me break down some of these other key groups here. All right, when it comes to race, this is what I was mentioning just a moment ago. Among black voters, Kamala Harris right now, while getting a strong support there from the black voters, she's running about 8 points behind Joe Biden, where he was in 2020. And we know that was key to his victory, the black electorate, the growing black electorate in Georgia. All right, now I want to break that down, adding to it gender. So if we go back to some of those key groups, there we go. All right, black men. This is another story that we're watching as polls are closing there in Georgia. Black men supported Harris. 73% of them supported Kamala Harris. Joe Biden was running at about 87% in 2020. Okay, so that is notable, obviously. And I'll end with this. Black women, okay? We were just talking about this with the election team downstairs. Kamala Harris getting about 89% of their support. Okay, Joe Biden, that number was about 95%. So she's running about 6 points behind with the support of black women in Georgia. All right, so I'll let you have that for fodder there. But there's certainly a story developing. And, you know, this was key to Joe Biden's flipping Georgia back in 2020. And if she's running below Joe Biden's levels there, that is something to watch, although her numbers are still strong with them. All right, I'll hand it back to you, John and Shannon.
All right, what a fascinating report. That's great to see. Georgia, just some numbers as they come in. Trump's leading about 51.5 to 48% for Harris, but that's only with less than 4% of the vote.
Yeah.
So we've got a long way to go.
Yeah, the night is young. All right, we've got reporters on the ground all across America, all of these states that we're following.
All right, the critical battleground that we're really looking at tonight is Pennsylvania. The polls are closing in a little over a half an hour. Our Jeff Flock, our intrepid Jeff Flock is there. Jeff, what's the mood where you are?
Hurricanes everywhere, John. Yeah, something I'm used to. This, you know, we focus a lot on, obviously, the top of the ticket, but what about the Senate? If the Republicans were to win the Senate seat here in Pennsylvania, and I'm at Dave McCormick headquarters in Philadelphia, or in Pittsburgh, if they were to win here, it would go a long way towards solidifying control of the Senate. You know, Dave McCormick is in some ways the ideal Senate candidate. He is a West Point grad, 82nd Airborne, fought in Iraq, worked in the Bush administration, and was at one point CEO of one of the largest hedge funds in the world. He's facing Bob Casey, the three-time Democrat incumbent here. He says Casey's been around too long and has pushed the notion that Casey is too liberal for Pennsylvania, citing his support for LGBTQ legislation. Casey firing back, talking about investments in China on the part of Bridgewater Associates, the hedge fund that McCormick headed. You know, the fight goes back and forth. The fact is that McCormick has been behind in the polls most of the way, but it's been very close. So we'll be watching that as we do everything tonight. John?
As you always do. Good to have Jeff Flock on the job. Thank you, Jeff. Our election night coverage continues.
All right, we're just minutes away from polls closing in 3 more states. We'll have results for you. Stay with us. We are just getting started.
Jonathan Hunt. Our election coverage continues. Happening right now in the next 4 minutes, polls will close in Ohio, West Virginia, and the key battleground state of North Carolina. And we're around a half an hour from polls closing in Pennsylvania, the one state that seems most likely to be key to the election for both presidential campaigns. Let's check in now with our reporters at both campaign headquarters. Rich Edson with the Harris camp in D.C. and Alexis McAdams with the Trump team in Florida. We'll start with Alexis at Trump HQ. Hello, Alexis.
Hey, Jonathan, if you can believe it, it is finally election night in America. We've been waiting for this for months, and so has former President Donald Trump, who is making his final push on the campaign trail just over the weekend, hitting North Carolina, Michigan, Wisconsin, you name it. One of the questions, Jonathan, that he kept asking at all the rallies we went to for months was, are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? It's a question that America might be able to answer tonight. Inside of the election headquarters here in Palm Beach, Florida, we're waiting to see exactly who is going to show up. There is a long list of speakers who are going to be up on that stage behind me. Will the former president show up? Only time will tell as those election results continue to flow in. Right now, he is at Mar-a-Lago watching those election results, Jonathan, with a small group of family and friends. And who else is there? That would be Elon Musk. So we'll have to see as he continues to react tonight to those polls closing in real time. Jonathan, back to you.
I'm sure he's watching on Fox. Thanks, Alexis. Let's turn now to Rich Edson with the Harris team. Hello, Rich.
Hey, good evening, Jonathan. Well, Vice President Kamala Harris is still at the Naval Observatory. That is the official residence of the vice president. She'll come here to Howard University in Washington, D.C. at HBCU in the middle of the city. It's a place she's familiar with. She's an alum of this school. Supporters and students have been filing into this area, main quad area of Howard University for some time now. They'll really start to get kicked up a little bit more as we start to get these returns coming in. Harris spent the day at the Democratic's national headquarters, campaign headquarters, close to the Capitol, where she talked to some phone bank workers, made a couple calls herself, also dialed into a few radio shows in some swing areas, radio shows airing and broadcasting in Atlanta and in North Carolina. She spent her final few days really hitting those blue-walled northern states, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. She closed in Philadelphia last night, went across the state in Michigan a couple of days before then, and so she's really hoping to bring that home. If she does, got a good chance of winning this thing. Jonathan?
Rich, great to see you. Thank you so much. Let's take a look at the timeline now for poll closings for the rest of the night. 8 p.m. Eastern, we get a chunk of polls closing, including Florida, Massachusetts, and, as we mentioned, the ever-important Pennsylvania. In the 9 p.m. Eastern hour, polls will close in 15 more states, including New York, Texas, Michigan, and Wisconsin. Polls also close in Arizona at that time. Both campaigns also watching that state very closely. Later in the evening, 10 p.m. Eastern, polls close in Nevada, Montana, and Utah. And rounding out the West Coast, polls close in California, Idaho, Oregon, and Washington at 11 p.m. Eastern. Taking a broader look at the electoral math tonight, only a handful of states are starting to report results, with still a long way to 270 for both sides. The safe bet was on Harris starting the night essentially with 226 in her pocket, Trump 219. So those 7 battleground states are absolutely the key. The night is young. We're just getting started. I'm Jonathan Hunt, and coverage continues here on Fox.
It is 7:30 at Fox News election headquarters in New York, and polls have just closed in 3 more states. North Carolina, the next state to watch, like Georgia, came down to the wire in the last presidential election and has 16 electoral college votes on offer. The Fox News decision desk says it's too early to call.
And, John, too early as well in Ohio, but former President Trump has had a lead in our Fox News voter analysis. Now, Fox News can project that Trump will win West Virginia.
And here is a current look at the race to 270. Donald Trump with 23 electoral votes. Kamala Harris with 3 so far. Vermont is the only state that she has been called in.
And by the way, we're tracking all these Senate races tonight. The biggest story in West Virginia is the Senate race there, where longtime Senator Joe Manchin, you remember, is retiring. He had been kind of a thorn in the side for Democrats the last couple of terms. Fox News can project now that Jim Justice will flip this seat to Republicans. Now, That win puts the GOP 1 seat away from an outright majority, assuming they hold the other seats we're looking at for them tonight. And we'll have to see, because there's some really tight races out there, and there's a little bit of worry with them in Nebraska about a seat they felt would be an easy hold for Deb Fischer. It may be at the end of the night, but it has been closer than they'd like.
So where we sit right now is that the Republicans would have 49 seats, to the Democrats 48. Then there's the Montana seat that's looking good for the Republicans. We'll see how that goes. That would take them to 50, and then they need one more to get back the majority.
Well, and of course, whoever wins at the top of the ticket,
correct,
their VP, if there's a tie, is going to be the tiebreaker.
Yeah, if Donald Trump were to win the presidency, they only need 50 to take control of the Senate. So,
all right, well,
a lot to talk about and chew over tonight.
That's true. We'll be here all night. And we hope you'll be with us, too. The Fox News Decision Desk says it's too early to call another Republican target. Ohio, where incumbent Democratic Senator Sherrod Brown is fighting for a 4th term against Republican businessman Bernie Moreno.
They have spent a ton of money on that race. Turning to the governor's races, Fox News can project that North Carolina's Democratic Attorney General Josh Stein will defeat Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson. That's a race that just, I mean, it fell apart a few weeks ago.
Yeah, and it's been a real headache for the top of the ticket, because of course Republicans have been worried that Robinson, with the allegations and scandals he's had to weather, would hurt the top of the ticket, as President Trump knows, and as does the Harris ticket, that it is a very tight race.
That is something that we'll chew over with the panel in just a couple of minutes.
We will, but first, in West Virginia, we can tell you that Republican Attorney General Patrick Morrisey will succeed Jim Justice as the state's 37th governor. We've got reporters all over the country tracking the pivotal races.
Our Peter Ducey is live at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, where the guy who we thought was going to be the nominee is sitting tonight. How are things there, Peter?
John and Shannon, the biggest Democratic party of the decade is here in Washington, D.C., and President Biden isn't going to be there. He is here at the White House while about 2 miles away. Everybody is gathering to see what is going to happen with Kamala Harris at Howard headquarters. But the fact that he is here and not there is astounding, really, because if you're keeping track at home, he got Harris elected the first time and raised millions of dollars for the re-election effort that he handed over to her, basically ready to go just 3.5 months ago. And for that, he winds up with a quiet night here at this house that she has spent through the campaign more than $1 billion to try to move into. White House officials, no more Biden campaign, are telling us that he is watching the returns come in on TV in the residence with longtime aides. And part of the reason that this is so extraordinary is because Joe Biden is somebody who reached the pinnacle of American politics by always saying things that were on the top of his mind. He was, even if it got him in trouble. And today, he is saying nothing. It does seem like there is a little bit of friction between the Biden teams and the Harris teams, because he's not the only one saying nothing. Yesterday, she was in Scranton, Pennsylvania, his hometown. She never mentioned his name one time. If there's an early call, it's possible that President Biden could head over to the headquarters to appear alongside his vice president, but it's very unlikely, because White House officials told us at 4 p.m. there was a lid. That means that we should not expect to see him or hear from him again until at least tomorrow. John and Shannon.
All right, Peter Ducey for us at the White House. Thank you, Peter. All right, tonight's results could impact the balance of power in the Senate, as we were talking about just a moment ago, and in the House. Let's take a closer look now. Net gain is the overall change in the number of seats in the Senate and House that are held by each party. This will be key on November the 5th as we track the balance of power. About a third of the Senate is up for grabs on election night, and most of those seats are held by Democrats. Democrats have a slim Senate majority right now. There are 51 Democrats, including 4 independents aligned with them, and 49 Republicans. The GOP needs a net gain of 2 seats to take the outright majority. And if former President Trump wins his race, Republicans would need just 1 pickup to flip the Senate, because the vice president will cast the tie-breaking vote.
Now, over on the House side of the Capitol, Republicans hold a razor-thin majority with 220 seats, while Democrats have 212. 3 vacant seats are likely to remain in party hands. With every seat up for grabs in the election, Democrats need to get a net gain of 4 to take control of the House. As you watch on election night, remember the balance of power could shift throughout the night as results come in. And with such small majorities in the Senate and House, control of Congress could ultimately come down to just a handful of seats.
All right, so that's what the balance of power looks like. We will be giving you the numbers throughout the night as the results come in. But right now, we're back with the panel to digest the latest results that we have.
Okay, so Mary Catherine, I want to start with you on the North Carolina discussion. You've got a lot of roots there, a lot of connections there. We knew Mark Robinson was in big trouble for this gubernatorial race. How does it, normally we talk about the down ballot effect, but what about the up ballot effect?
No, I think it's definitely an issue, and the Trump campaign has known about it for a little while. It didn't happen right before the election, so they could do some work on it. But it's going to be a liability of some sort. The other part that I want to tell you guys about North Carolina that's just like unalloyed good news for everyone is that in Western North Carolina, where many people don't have running water and they're in really chaotic circumstances, people have really worked their butts off to make sure that people can vote, and the early voting has been meeting or exceeding 2020 early vote. So that is exciting just to see people be able to do that and to want to do that in this moment.
Yeah, as they try to put things back together. Such a fundamental right.
So we were talking about this off camera early. The Republicans outpaced the Democrats for the very first time in the early vote in North Carolina. But you say the Harris campaign is feeling very good about this evening.
Well, I think part of it is this governor's race. The fact that we called it as early as we did and as quickly as we did in a state that's had pretty close governor's races and certainly presidential races is a sign that Democrats feel good about that up ballot effect. There are also a bunch of House races. We haven't talked as much about those yet tonight, but a bunch of House races up and down the eastern seaboard that will help determine the fate of the House. Democrats also feeling confident about taking back the House in places like California and New York, which we won't have results on for a very long time. But even places like North Carolina, Virginia, others where they have some critical holds, we'll start seeing some of that data soon. But I do think Democrats feel very good about North Carolina. Haven't really been competitive there since the Barack Obama years. But certainly at the presidential level, because of the down ballot problems, because of the organization there, and you know the Trump campaign was worried because they sent him to the state a bunch of times over the last week of the campaign, sent J.D. Vance there. They were clearly worried.
Well, and we know that with North Carolina, it's one of those states that we will caution people throughout the night. Every state counts these things differently, and they're bundles of votes that come in. Something may seem very red or very blue, and then shift over time as more votes come in.
But they count quickly. North Carolina does count pretty quickly.
They get it done quickly, but first results, Juan, generally we see there do skew more blue.
Yeah, that's right. But what you have to also think about is where the votes are coming from. Because in North Carolina, the big difference would be Research Triangle, that area. And also then you also have to consider what's going on in Charlotte. But then you take those two areas and then you start to, mitigate those results in terms of what's coming from the more rural areas, including some of the areas that Mary Catherine was talking about that have been hard hit. But I think that right now what you're seeing is that there's been a shift in terms of voters in reaction to Mark Robinson as the GOP gubernatorial candidate. I just think it's hard to get away from that. I note that former President Trump, who had endorsed him, embraced him early on, did not campaign with him, stopped, period.
And said, please don't come to my campaign events. We don't know what the conversation was, but he was not on stage with them.
In terms of where we are in North Carolina, it's very early. It's less than 2% of the vote. Harris leads 68-30. Wake County in the Research Triangle, she's 71-27. Buncombe County, she's 76-21. Nothing yet from Mecklenburg County. And of course, the rural areas are very slow to count at this point too. But she's got a big lead in North Carolina right now. But again, that's probably early vote to a large degree, and it's only this much of the vote that's been counted. So.
Well, and some of those exurbs too are going to be interesting. Union County, Cabarrus County, Nash County outside of Wake County, because those are becoming more well-educated, more affluent, and it's slightly more diverse than they used to be. And so those will be indicators of where we're headed.
Let's let Guy get a word in here.
Well, I would just say, I think independents are probably going to be the ball game because for the first time ever, Republicans actually outpaced Democrats in the early vote. It's never happened before in North Carolina. I spoke to some really well plugged-in GOP sources in that state who said, yeah, we understand there's a problem on the governor's race. The polls showed the problem. Like the fact that we called it this early against Robinson for Stein is not a shock to anyone at all. The question to me was, which way will the independents end up breaking down in that state? And some early indications in Georgia and Florida are looking fairly good for Republicans on that front. Are independents, if that's true, are independents in North Carolina a different breed and going a different direction, or do they sort of herd together, or at least sort of move in that direction as one up and down the eastern seaboard, still in the southeast? That's one of the big questions we'll be watching here.
Are they more like Virginia or Georgia? their independents, right? Do they go north or south?
Well, and generally they split about
Well,
like partisans.
we're going to wrap this segment. We've got a lot more to talk about, including Georgia, where Trump has a big early lead, but nothing from the big counties yet.
All right, so our election night coverage continues. We are going to be looking at all of these things and more. Polls closing in 17 more states. Top of the hour.
All right, let's put up the Electoral College scoreboard. 270 votes needed to win. Trump at 23. Kamala Harris still at 3 because Vermont is the only race that has been called for her so far statewide. We'll be right back. Live look at Milwaukee now. Critical state of Wisconsin.
We've got reporters spread all over the country covering this historic election. Let's check in with a couple of them. Molly Line is live in New York City. Hey, Molly.
Good evening. I'm talking about the governor's race and the uber competitive governor's race up in New Hampshire, the Granite State. This one is one to watch. This is the best chance the Democrats have of flipping a longtime Republican seat, the Republican governor there, not running in this election. Former Republican Senator Kelly Ayotte is facing off against the former mayor of Manchester. This is the state's largest city. Her name, she's a Democrat, Joyce Craig. Abortion has been at the forefront of this race between the two women. Craig attacking Ayotte's record as a senator, voting for a national ban after 20 weeks. In response, Ayotte has pushed back and said she would adhere to state law, which limits abortions after 24 weeks. Now, Craig has pushed back on efforts that Ayotte has made and some of the negative advertising to criticize the way she ran the city of Manchester at the point when she was running it as mayor, linking it to crime, linking to statistics as drug use. And she's pushed back using statistics that say that crime is actually down, that the opioid epidemic has been addressed in that city. So we're still waiting for further results to come in. The polls finished closing there in the Granite State at 8 o'clock. Some of them have already started to close. No results yet that we can talk about. But when it comes to the casting and the counting of the votes in New Hampshire, it's worth noting that the Granite State does it old school. They use paper ballots. That's not unusual. There are a lot of communities that use counting machines, but 122 of the towns there in the state of New Hampshire actually hand count their ballots, which could lead to a little bit of a later night in New Hampshire. Back to you, Shannon. John.
All right, Molly Line, thank you so much.
All right, let's bring in Charles Payne now, the host of Making Money on the Fox Business Channel. This is right up your alley because our Fox News voter analysis found that 40% of people who voted said that the economy was their #1 issue. And what's really interesting, we didn't get a chance to talk about this when we were on America Reports earlier, but Trump voters say they're really feeling the pinch of the economy. Harris voters are saying not so much.
Yeah. And
is that just perception, or is that somehow
part perception? But you know what's happened, John, is that the parties have, this has been a sort of a historical point. The Democrats are now the party of the more affluent. It's the party of the elite, educated elite, the top 1%. And so, yes, their voters, they're now their core constituents who are doing better. By the way, they got a lot of help. You know, they wanted to spend up to as much as $1.4 trillion to pay off taxes, and earned income tax credits went up to couples making $300,000. Programs that were initially designed for poor folks were rejiggered, particularly during COVID, and expanded to people who really didn't need it, just like the $1.9 trillion, you know, that we got in that COVID relief. So the irony is that this is not perception per se, it's the official crossing where the Republican Party under Trump has become the party of the blue-collar worker.
Well, what about this closing on the economy that Harris has really made up some ground on this? It was a huge benefit to President Trump. And then as she's campaigned over the last 105, 106 days, there's been a close there. And one of the things I've heard the most from the other side is this tariff question. Right. Because Trump talks about it a lot, and they're like, okay, that's an automatic $4,000 extra for every American family. It seems to have stuck with people.
It has, and I think you have a couple things. You have, obviously, the media has pounced on it. And tariffs generally is something that even real conservative economists don't like. And everyone points to Smoot-Hawley, right? That was, right after the market crashed, the world was falling apart, and everyone sort of panicked, and we put in tariffs. There were counter tariffs, and it didn't work for anyone. But what Trump is talking about is that the reason they used tariffs at Smoot-Hawley is because they had actually worked in 1922. As we were coming out of World War I, a Great Depression, and we were trying to help our farmers. They actually worked with McKinley. And in fact, President McKinley created an environment where Republicans essentially dominated for the next 30 years. And we didn't need taxes then, right? We didn't have taxes until 1913. So tariffs were the primary way we raised money. Obviously, it's a larger, more complicated economy now, but only people have heard a lot of negative things about it. I don't know that people understand, though, from a negotiating point of view. It's my prediction. If President Trump wins tonight, or whatever they count it, yeah. If he comes out of this as the winner, I'm predicting an Iranian hostage moment for him. Remember Jimmy Carter and Iranian hostages? They let him go on the day that Ronald Reagan was inaugurated. I believe China will come to the table with some sort of a deal by the time President Trump, elected President Trump, will be inaugurated, because he went to war with them when he was in office, and they have stumbled badly ever since.
So do you think the deal will include Taiwan?
It won't include Taiwan.
I mean, like, we're going to take Taiwan. I mean, an agreement to leave Taiwan
Let's
alone.
just be peaceful.
No, I think they can never say they're going to leave them alone, because that's in their national charter that eventually they want to bring Taiwan
leave them
back.
alone for now.
But less saber rattling, But I think in terms of reciprocal commerce, because of all the tariffs they put on us, you know, hey, it's just reciprocal.
Charles, great to see you tonight.
Great to see
Always
you too.
good to see you.
Thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
All right, Fox News Democracy 24 coverage of election night continues.
Here is a look at the race to 270 as we count down the minutes to more polls closing in several states. At the top of the hour, Donald Trump still with 23, Kamala Harris with 3. That's going to change, though. We'll be right back.
Tubi is proud to be free for all small business owners. But it's also free for thugs and cronies who shake down small businesses for money. Because Tubi is free for everyone, and we mean everyone.
We have reporters across the country tracking all of the pivotal races for you tonight. Our coverage of Democracy 2024.
Yep, let's turn now to Nate Foy in Ohio, tracking the Senate battle that could determine the balance of power in the upper chamber. Hey, Nate.
Hey guys, good evening. Yeah, a lot of money spent in this Senate race, more than $400 million in ad spending. The polls now closed in Ohio, and strong voter turnout. More than 2.5 million Ohioans voted early at this specific polling location. At 5 a.m., there was a line around the building with people ready to cast their vote. They know what's on the line. The state is expected to go with former President Donald Trump for a third time. 17 electoral votes on the line there. But the key race that everybody is watching is for the U.S. Senate seat, with incumbent Democratic Senator Sherrod Brown seeking a fourth term against the GOP challenger Bernie Moreno. Moreno, new to politics, Brown the opposite. Been in politics for 50 years at this point. And Senator Brown has really campaigned on reproductive rights, which are enshrined in Ohio's state constitution. Moreno told us last night for that reason it should be a non-issue, and he believes that Senator Brown is turning abortion into a political weapon.
There is no ability federally to be able to handle abortion at the federal level one way or the other. So what I'm going to focus on as a United States Senator is to bring people together on this issue.
Trump's impact will certainly be felt here down ballot in that Senate race. Keep in mind, no Democratic senator has ever won an election in a state that Trump carried while Trump was on the ballot. So we'll see if Senator Brown can buck that trend with enough split ticket voters tonight, or if Bernie Moreno can ride that Trump momentum to a win. We'll send it back to you.
Yeah, there are places we see those split tickets. It actually happens. All right, Nate, we'll check back with you in Ohio. Thank you so much.
Could be a lot of ticket splitting today. We're now back with our panel to digest the latest results. First thing I wanted to point out was Fulton County Police down there in Georgia. Atlanta is the big city in Fulton County. Said that there were bomb threats to 32 polling places today. Some of the polls are staying open a little later because they had to be closed down earlier. We do not have any results, Mary Catherine Ham, from those big counties just yet. At the moment, with a little less than 20% of the vote in, Trump leads in Georgia 59-39. But that'll change as the results from Fulton, Gwinnett, DeKalb, and Cobb and Clayton counties.
Well, it sounds like thankfully they've got that at least under control and extended a little bit so that people can have their rights and exercise them. A couple of good points for Trump. It looked like in Baldwin County, which the county seat is Milledgeville. It's a place that has been trending. Hillary won it by just a point or so. Biden also, and with 65% in it, looked like +4 for Trump. So if he ends up turning a county like that, that could be a big deal for him. But we don't know if that'll hold.
You know, just to that point about the threats, the FBI today put out a notice about threats and said it was coming from the Russians.
Right.
And I was surprised that they did that, and my thought was, they're doing this, I think, to signal to the Russians they're on to them. I don't think it was so much to Americans to say, worry about your safety if you go to vote. I think they were trying to tamp down the Russian activity.
Well, and you know, Guy, we've heard a lot about outsider activity and things that are being watched. And the federal agencies have been very careful to say we're not about First Amendment. People are going to have a lot of opinions, a lot of things to say about the election. But we do want to make sure there aren't outside actors that are creating chaos that impacts vote totals.
Of course. And it sounds like that is not the case. We hope that turns out to be true. Coming back to Georgia and looking at some of the numbers, I know we're talking about key swing counties, and we're talking about these big urban counties and what will that turnout look like. I think a huge story of tonight's election, not just in Georgia, but around the country, is going to be the rurals. The rurals are going gangbusters right now for Donald Trump and Republicans in the state of Georgia. And you look at one after another outperforming their heavily red performances from 4 years ago. This is a state that came down to so few votes. So, of course, the swing counties and bellwethers are interesting. And, of course, keeping an eye on turnout in the big ones will be a huge part of the story. But if Trump and the Republicans are to have a good night this evening in a place like Georgia or nationally, Wisconsin and other places come to mind, keep an eye on rurals, because the rurals are, at least right now, looking really strong for Trump.
So Biden flipped Georgia for the first time since 1992 in 2020. What are you keeping an eye on as these numbers come in? Is it the degree of turnout? And we've just got 10 seconds left. What are you looking for?
And we elected 2 Democratic senators also. I mean, Democrats have had a pretty good run in Georgia, and the question is whether that has been flipped tonight. Turnout's obviously the key.
All right.
We'll see.
Well, it sounds like we've got a little bit of news out of South Carolina.